Joshua's story begins at a moment of uncertainty rather than triumph. The generation that had left Egypt was gone, leadership had changed, and the people shaped by wandering now stood at the edge of settlement. Ancient Israel was no longer escaping oppression but facing responsibility. The challenge was no longer survival in the desert, but transformation into a nation. Joshua emerged not as a revolutionary or prophet, but as a successor, a man stepping into authority defined by memory, expectation, and fear. Unlike Moses, Joshua did not confront a powerful empire. He confronted the consequences of transition, leading a people who had known miracles, but not governance, faith but not structure, obedience but not ownership. The land before them was inhabited, fortified, organized, and defended, and Joshua's task was not symbolic liberation, but physical occupation, which required disciplined strategy and collective coordination. This distinction shapes his entire legacy. Joshua was not chosen for vision alone, but for execution. His leadership was practical rather than dramatic, grounded in order rather than confrontation. The crossing of the Jordan marked more than a geographical shift. It represented the end of dependency and the beginning of accountability. Miracles still framed the moment, but they no longer replaced effort. Joshua led a people who had to learn restraint as much as courage, unity as much as faith. The fall of Jericho illustrates this transformation, not through brute force, but through disciplined patience and obedience. The walls did not fall because of superior weapons, but because of coordinated restraint. A people learning to move together rather than react individually. This marked a shift from survival mentality to institutional behavior. Joshua's leadership emphasized boundaries, rules, and shared responsibility. Unlike earlier figures who disrupted systems, Joshua built one. But building required exclusion, decisions, and conflict. Conquest brought moral tension as well as political stability. And Joshua's story does not avoid this complexity. It exposes it. Leadership in this phase demanded clarity, not charisma. Continuity, not impulse. Joshua did not question his mandate publicly, but his actions reveal an awareness of fragility. Unity had to be maintained, or the project would fail. Disobedience threatened collective stability, and individual actions carried national consequences. This is why Joshua's leadership feels controlled rather than emotional. His role was to translate belief into structure, promise into policy, movement into settlement. His greatest challenge was not the enemy outside, but fragmentation within. And this internal pressure defined every campaign, every decision, and every boundary he enforced. Joshua's life represents the cost of transition, the difficulty of turning vision into permanence, and the burden of leadership when miracles fade and responsibility remains. His story is not about rival, but about maintenance, not about inspiration, but about discipline. And it reveals a truth that every society eventually faces. Freedom is easier to claim than to sustain. As Joshua's leadership moved forward, the challenge shifted from crossing into the land to holding it together. Conquest required more than courage. It required coordination, patience, and restraint. The campaigns that followed were not chaotic raids, but carefully sequenced movements, designed to prevent fragmentation. Joshua understood that a people recently formed could not survive divided action. Unity had to come before expansion. This is why the narrative repeatedly emphasizes order, assembly, and shared responsibility. Every tribe had a role, every action carried consequence. Early victories created confidence, but also risk. Because confidence without discipline quickly becomes arrogance. The episode at Ai reveals this danger clearly. A small target exposed a deeper weakness. Disobedience within the community undermined collective strength, and Joshua's response shows his leadership style. He did not deny failure or shift blame outward. He confronted internal fracture directly, reinforcing the idea that the greatest threat to stability was not external resistance, but internal disorder. This moment marks a critical evolution in leadership. Miracles no longer compensated for negligence. Accountability replaced exception. Joshua's authority rested not on charisma, but on enforcement of boundaries. This made his leadership less dramatic, but more durable. Alliances formed, and enemies reacted as word spread that Israel operated as a coordinated force, rather than a wandering group. Treaties such as the one with the Gibeonites reveal another layer of complexity. Joshua's decisions balanced pragmatism with obligation. Mistakes carried long-term consequences, yet were absorbed into structure rather than denied. This flexibility within order allowed the system to survive error without collapse. Militarily, Joshua avoided unnecessary fragmentation by securing central territory first, then extending outward, reducing the chance of isolation and rebellion psychologically. This strategy reinforced collective identity. Each campaign reinforced the idea that success depended on obedience and unity. Rather than individual heroism, Joshua's leadership suppressed impulse in favor of continuity. This suppression often appears rigid, but it served a purpose. Societies in transition require limits to prevent regression. Joshua's strictness reflects awareness that freedom without structure dissolves quickly. His story, therefore, becomes less about conquest and more about institutionalization. The shift from movement to permanence demanded sacrifice of spontaneity in exchange for stability. And Joshua accepted this trade openly, understanding that legacy is built not through dramatic moments, but through sustained order. His leadership demonstrates that the most difficult phase of any transformation is not the breakthrough, but the maintenance that follows it. As the campaigns continued, Joshua's role became increasingly administrative rather than heroic. Victories were followed by allocation. Boundaries were drawn, land was divided, and responsibility was assigned. This phase reveals the least celebrated, yet most critical aspect of leadership, turning conquest into continuity. Joshua understood that possession without structure would invite chaos. So distribution of land was not merely geographic, but political and psychological. Each tribe received territory tied to obligation, reinforcing identity through stewardship rather than movement. This transition demanded trust in systems rather than reliance on miracles. And trust is harder to sustain than faith. Tensions emerged as tribes compared portions, questioned fairness, and tested authority. Joshua's response remained consistent. Order over emotion, discipline over impulse, This consistency created stability, but also rigidity. Some groups adapted quickly, others resisted change, longing for the mobility of earlier years. Joshua's leadership did not romanticize the past. He framed settlement as responsibility rather than reward, reminding the people that permanence required vigilance. Alliances with surrounding groups introduced further complexity. Coexistence demanded restraint yet constant awareness. Joshua navigated these pressures by reinforcing collective memory, recounting past failures and successes to anchor identity in shared experience, rather than individual ambition. This use of memory functioned as social glue, binding diverse tribes into a single narrative. Yet memory also carried warning. Disobedience had consequences not as punishment, but as destabilization. Joshua's insistence on obedience was rooted in fragility rather than control. He recognized that young systems collapse under divided loyalty. Religious practice, social order, and military readiness were intertwined. Separation of these domains would weaken cohesion. Joshua's leadership therefore appears strict because it aimed to preserve alignment across belief, action, and governance. This alignment came at a cost. Flexibility was limited, dissent was restrained, and moral tension intensified as conquest gave way to coexistence. Joshua's story does not resolve this tension, it exposes it, revealing that leadership in transitional periods demands choices that are neither clean nor comfortable. Stability requires enforcement, and enforcement risks alienation. Joshua accepted this burden without spectacle. His authority did not depend on personal legacy, but on collective survival. This approach ensured continuity beyond his lifetime, but it also reduced space for individual expression. Joshua's leadership represents the cost of building permanence, where freedom must be regulated to endure and unity must be protected, even at the expense of spontaneity. This stage of his life demonstrates that successful leadership is often invisible because it prevents collapse rather than creating drama. As Joshua's leadership matured, the moral weight of his decisions became heavier than the military burden. Conquest had delivered territory, but not peace of conscience. Though land was secured, yet questions remained unresolved. How power should be exercised once resistance was broken. How unity should be preserved without becoming oppression. And how identity could survive without turning rigid. Joshua governed in a space where certainty was required, but comfort was absent. Every decision reinforced order while narrowing moral flexibility. This tension is central to understanding his legacy. Joshua did not deny conflict, he managed it. The narrative shows repeated reminders that success depended on alignment rather than force. When alignment weakened, instability followed. This pattern reveals Joshua's core belief that obedience was not blind submission, but a survival mechanism for a fragile society. Unlike Moses, whose authority was rooted in revelation and confrontation, Joshua's authority was rooted in continuity and enforcement. He inherited vision, but was tasked with implementation. And implementation always exposes limits. Mistakes were absorbed rather than erased. Compromises were managed rather than celebrated. This practical leadership style lacks drama, but carries endurance. Joshua's farewell addresses reflect this. Awareness, He does not promise expansion, glory, or dominance. He warns of erosion, distraction, and divided loyalty. His focus shifts from enemies outside to decay within, revealing a leader who understands that the greatest threat to permanence is complacency. Memory becomes his final tool, reminding the people of dependence, humility, and consequence. This emphasis on remembrance functions as a safeguard against fragmentation. Joshua's leadership therefore ends not with conquest, but with caution. Stability achieved yet conditional, identity secured yet vulnerable. His life illustrates that leadership after revolution is harder than leadership during it, because the absence of crisis removes urgency while leaving responsibility intact. Joshua's story closes on this unresolved note deliberately, not to glorify control, but to highlight cost. The cost of sustaining freedom through discipline rather than inspiration. The cost of unity maintained through limits rather than enthusiasm. And the cost borne by leaders who must choose continuity over popularity. Joshua is remembered not for dramatic miracles, but for preserving momentum when miracles faded. His legacy is institutional rather than heroic, and it reveals a truth often overlooked. Societies do not collapse when vision fails. They collapse when structure erodes. Joshua's leadership existed to prevent that erosion, quietly, firmly, and without spectacle. Joshua's story ultimately reveals that the most difficult form of leadership is not the one that begins a movement, but the one that must preserve it. He inherited a people shaped by promise and crisis, and was tasked with turning belief into permanence. His success is measured not by dramatic moments, but by what did not happen: collapse, fragmentation, and loss of direction. Joshua understood that freedom without structure decays quickly, and that unity without discipline dissolves into memory. His leadership therefore appears restrained, controlled, and uncompromising. Not because he lacked vision, but because vision without order invites chaos. Unlike figures who inspire through confrontation, Joshua governed through consistency, reinforcing alignment between belief, action, and responsibility. This approach limited individual expression, but protected collective identity. And this trade-off defines his legacy. Joshua did not expand endlessly, nor did he chase dominance. He focused on stability, knowing that permanence requires boundaries. His farewell warnings reflect a leader aware that systems survive only as long as people remember why they exist. Memory, responsibility, and restraint became his final tools. Replacing miracles and momentum, Joshua's life closes not with conquest, but with caution. Not with expansion, but with consolidation. His legacy stands as a reminder that leadership after transition is quieter, heavier, and often misunderstood, because it carries the burden of sustaining what others only dreamed of. Joshua's story speaks to every society that emerges from crisis into responsibility, showing that freedom must be managed to endure, and that discipline is not the enemy of liberty, but its foundation. He remains a figure defined not by spectacle, but by endurance, not by vision alone, but by the structures that kept vision alive. And in this endurance lies the true measure of his leadership.